the dream that became a language,
and I was transported to the passage of the Jordan.
and the so-called heretic that united the people.
It was necessary as breathing is necessary to survival.
The hope continues on today's 700 Club Interactive. Welcome to the show. Today, Hebrew is the official language of Israel, but that almost wasn't the case. In the early 20th century, religious Jews thought it was blasphemy to use the holy language for everyday conversation. And secular Jews from Europe preferred to speak the language of their native countries.
Even Zionist leader Theodor Herzl envisioned a Jewish state with German as the official language. But one man made it his life's work to bring the Hebrew language back to life, a calling he says began with a vision from God.
One night in 1875, a young Jewish man had a vision.
Suddenly, as if lightning struck, an incandescent light radiated before my eyes, and I was transported to the passage of the Jordan, where the children of Israel crossed into the promised land. And a great voice rang in my ears, the return of the people to the language and the land.
And he says, and ever since that time, that voice rings in my ears. That, to my mind, means that God commissioned him to call on his fellow Jews to return to the promised land.
Eliezer ben Yehuda was born in Belarus in 1858. His fascination with the Hebrew language started early, and he began studying the Bible at the age of 3. His parents wanted him to become a rabbi, so they sent him to yeshiva.
He was definitely a God-fearing man, that he was a believing man, but he was not a synagogue Jew.
After high school, ben Yehuda broke the news to his mother. He wanted to be a doctor, not a rabbi. So he went to the Sorbonne in Paris, where he studied medicine, Jewish history, and philosophy. He also discovered a movement that would later be known as Zionism.
There was no Zionism at the time. Herzl was still 20 years away from writing his famous Jewish state, but Eliezer was there. And Eliezer was advocating for a Jewish state. Let's go back there. Let's reestablish ourselves in that land. Let us revive the Hebrew, which is the language in which God spoke to us. Then we will resume our proper place in the scheme of things.
Ben Yehuda's plans to be a doctor ended when he developed tuberculosis.
Ben Yehuda went to a clinic, and there the doctors examined him and told him that he's doomed. He will not live to celebrate his next birthday. They said, you better make your peace with the world because you are not going to live long.
As he faced the idea of death, he remembered his vision several years earlier of God calling him to the promised land.
That is when he decided, when he, apparently saw the writing on the wall, and he said, God doesn't want me to be in Paris. God wants me to be what he showed me.
Before he left, he broke the news to his fiancée, Devora, who was still back in Russia. But instead of writing to her directly, he wrote to her father.
He said, Dear sir, I'm writing you this letter because I want you to break the news to your daughter that I have a mortal disease and I will not be able to marry her.
Devora refused to be jilted and followed him to Jerusalem.
And so they got married, they came to Israel together, and Eliezer ben Yehuda claimed that he was born again in Jerusalem.
In 1881, Palestine didn't look like their idea of the Promised Land.
Jerusalem and all of the land of Israel was deserted. It was deserted by people, it was deserted by nature. And when Eliezer came back, he said, we have to bring God back to the land.
The land was deserted, and the people were divided.
Until he started talking Hebrew in Jerusalem, the Jews that came from Poland only dealt with other people who came from Poland because they spoke the same language. And the people who came from Romania only spoke with other people who came from Romania.
To help unify the people, Ben Yehuda started publishing a newspaper entirely in Hebrew. At the time, there wasn't even a Hebrew word for newspaper, or for the dictionary he would compile later. So Ben Yehuda coined the new words himself, using roots of ancient languages like Hebrew, Canaanite, and Arabic. The ancient Hebrew word et, for time, became eton for newspaper, since a newspaper is a time-sensitive publication. A dictionary is a collection of words, and a word in Hebrew is milah, so dictionary became milon.
He would write articles for the paper, and he would say, there was a huge fire in Jerusalem. Only people didn't know the word for fire. In the back of his newspaper, he put a little list of words. And he told people, I will only have it listed once. So if you don't remember it, please cut this list and keep it.
Soon his readers started sending requests for a full dictionary, so Ben Yehuda started compiling one. In many cases, he turned to the Bible for inspiration in creating new words. One example is the word for pistol.
He tried to find roots in old words. There's a word in Ezekiel that speaks about certain stones, and the text calls them avnei ekdach, and it doesn't tell us what ekdach is. Now, we also know about a young lad who could do wonders by using his sling with a couple of good stones. And so Eliezer put his mind to it, and he says, those stones put a hole in the head of Goliath. Maybe that was avnei ekdach. Today, you can use this pistol, and you can put a nice hole in somebody's head, which will kind of slow him down, you know, just like he did with Goliath. And so he decided to call that thing ekdach, and that's the name to this day. Now, did they have pistols back in Bible days? No, they didn't. But the word fits.
Ben Yehuda also created a committee to help him with specialized words.
What he did was he invited people who could tell him what words are necessary. For example, he had a doctor, and the doctor said to him, we need a word for syringe. We need a word for putting a band around a wound.
For his family and friends, Ben Yehuda had a strict rule: Hebrew only. This posed a challenge for his wife, who knew Russian, French, and German, but very little Hebrew.
He said to his wife, he says, if nobody wants to talk Hebrew with you, then you're going to be without friends. I'm really sorry.
That rule also applied to his son, whom he named Ben Zion, or son of Zion. Even as a baby, he was kept at home so he wouldn't be exposed to other languages.
He was almost 3 years old, didn't say a word. And everybody in town was whispering behind their backs that the reason was that they were only talking Hebrew to him. They said, you see, he's going to grow up to be an idiot. The mother was much more affected, apparently, by the rumors than the husband. So one day when she was alone at home, you know, she was sitting holding the baby. He was crying, and she was trying to console him and get him to quiet down. And finally she started singing him a lullaby that her mother sang to her when she was a baby. And it was a Russian lullaby.
At that moment, Ben Yehuda walked in
And of course he raised the roof, or at least the ceiling. What are you doing? You're ruining everything. Here I worked so hard and I've done all this, etc., you know. And he was just hollering at her. And suddenly the child opened up his mouth and said, "Enough already, Father. Die, Abba, die." It's die, which means stop in Hebrew. Enough. And Dvorah and Eliezer, you know, were wordless all of a sudden. He spoke.
Several years later, tragedy struck the Ben Yehuda family. Dvorah contracted Eliezer's tuberculosis, and 2 years later, she died.
He felt a tremendous sense of guilt, and within 90 days of her death, 3 out of the 5 children died also. Not of tuberculosis, but of a flu epidemic.
Before she died, Dvorah had written a letter to her younger sister, Hemda, who still lived in Russia.
She says, "I'm going to be gone very soon, and it's going to be your turn." And then she put in another line, and she said, "If you want to be a princess, come to Jerusalem and marry my Eliezer."
Hemda followed her sister's advice and wrote to Eliezer. He refused to marry her, fearing that he would give her the disease as well. But Hemda, like her sister, wouldn't take no for an answer.
And so she kind of forced his hand, and he married her. And she lived with him 30 years. And she had 6 children with him, 3 of whom died. The 2 children that survived from her sister, she raised. And she was my grandmother. His first wife was the love of his youth. He also adored and loved his second wife. But his second wife was not, you know, like a big romance love affair type of a thing. His second wife was his helpmate. If he would have continued the way he was with his first wife, he would have never finished the work. And probably the whole thing would have failed. God had prepared this woman for him. When Hemda Ben Yehuda came and she saw his journals, she said, "How do you know where the words are? How are you going to alphabetize the words?" He says, "Well, what do you think in your great wisdom?" And she said, "Index cards. You put each word on an index card. All the Aleph words are here, and all the Bet words are here, and all the Gimel words are here. And now you're ready to do a dictionary."
As his body of work grew, Ben Yehuda was often targeted by Jerusalem's Orthodox Jews, who labeled him a heretic. They considered Hebrew to be a holy language and objected to using it for what they called idle chatter. He wasn't very popular with the new Zionist movement either. Their leader, Theodor Herzl, was from Vienna, and he envisioned a new Jewish state with German as the national language. When Herzl toured Palestine in 1898, he took just 5 minutes to meet with Ben Yehuda. And that evening, he mentioned the encounter in his diary.
"I met a young fanatic who tried to convince me that what our movement needs is to adopt Hebrew as our national language. It is, of course, ridiculous."
But Ben Yehuda never strayed from his mission. He spent the next 2 decades working feverishly to finish his dictionary, sometimes 17 hours a day. The majority of Jews in Jerusalem were now speaking Hebrew, and in 1921, it became one of the 3 official languages of British-ruled Palestine, along with English and Arabic. By then, Ben Yehuda's work had taken a fatal toll on his fragile health.
Eliezer Ben Yehuda died in the month of December, in the second night of Hanukkah. My grandmother had a salon, you know, she was always entertaining friends, and Ben Yehuda participated with them, and then he excused himself and he went back to his study, and he was working for a while, and then he lay down and he just couldn't wake up. When the people left, Hemda came into his room and she saw him lying there, and she started to talk to him and he didn't answer. He just returned his soul to God. A mere 40 years after he had been told that he has no future.
30,000 people followed his funeral procession from the old city of Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives, where he was buried. And today, one of the city's most popular streets bears his name, a tribute to the man who gave the Jewish people back their language. As one man put it, before Ben Yehuda, Jews could speak Hebrew. After him, they did.
Imagine if there had not been an Eliezer Ben Yehuda, and if in 1948 you would have had Jews living in Israel speaking 70 to 80 languages. It would have never worked. The language was absolutely part of the rebirth. It was necessary as breathing is necessary to survival. And Ben Yehuda is the man that God appointed to make that possible.
It all began with a vision to a young boy who was living in Russia at the time, and God spoke to him the restoration of the language and the people to the land. Well, Ben Yehuda's story is just one of the many you'll be seeing over the next few days about the founding of the State of Israel. Tomorrow, we're going to be telling the story of Winston Churchill and how instrumental he was in protecting Israel, protecting the dream of a Jewish state. And if you miss an episode or want to see his story again, all you have to do is go to 700clubinteractive.com. We'll have all the episodes on the website. And if you want to collect all of them and all the bonus material, we have a documentary on your choice, either DVD or Blu-ray. And what we're asking for is a donation of $10. If you want it, just give us a call. The number is toll-free, 888-777-1999. Just ask for The Hope. You can also order it online at 700clubinteractive.com. Terry?
Well, still to come, he's a Jewish believer in Jesus and host of the show It's Supernatural. But that wasn't always the case.
I left my wife, I left my daughter, I left my job, and I went searching for happiness.
See how that search nearly cost him his life when we come back. Sid Roth was raised in a Jewish household, attended synagogue, and dreamed of being a millionaire by the age of 30. Before long, he found himself at 29 years old with a beautiful family, a great job, and plenty of wealth. Yet it wasn't enough. So he walked away from it all.
I was raised in a Jewish home. We went to an Orthodox synagogue. I remember as a young kid, my parents were into athletics. Their particular sport was poker. And they were out late at night, and I was home alone. And I remember, like a little kid would do, I would say over and over again, I wish they'd come home, I wish they'd come home. And one night when I was saying, I wish they'd come home, a thought popped in my mind. What happens when you die? And in Judaism, we don't talk about death. It's a l'chaim, to life. I'd never even pondered that thought. The only conclusion I could come up with is you cease to exist. But it was such an objectionable thought that I blocked it from my mind for many, many years. So I blinked my eyes a few times and graduated college, and I wrote a song called There Must Be Something More. I remember the words, they went like this: because I work, eat, sleep, and that's the way it goes. Because I work, eat, sleep, and that's the way it goes. There must be something more. But I didn't know what that something more was. And I blinked my eyes a few times, and I was married, and I blinked my eyes a few times, and I had a daughter, and I blinked my eyes a few times, and I had a wonderful career job with Merrill Lynch. My goal in life was to become a millionaire before 30, and now I'm 29. I wasn't happy. There must be something more. So I did something I'm not proud of. I left my wife, I left my daughter, I left my job, and I went searching for happiness. But you know, it's a big world out there if you don't know what you're searching for. At the end of a year, things were worse. I took a course, a mind expansion course, where they promised me by the end of the 1-week course, I would know things that I never programmed in my brain. And it worked, and I was so excited. I would just think a thought, and it would happen like this. I would say, I'd like to go into business for myself, counselor. And a man that I just knew casually came into my office and said, Sid, if you ever want to go into business for yourself, we have extra space. We'll let you use our secretary free, our telephones, our office is free. I thought, wow, this power is terrific. But this businessman turned out to be a born-again Christian. And he invited me to a Bible study. He looked at me and said, Sid, do you realize what you're doing is an abomination to God? I said, oh, come on. He said, look in your own Bible, turn to Deuteronomy 18. It said you go to fortune tellers and seances and witches and stuff like that, and lists all these things that I'm doing. But it was an abomination. And this kind of scared me. So I decided I'd put it on hold for a minute, maybe read this Bible. And even though I had a good Orthodox background, I didn't know the Torah. And at that time, I went into a bookstore and I went into the New Age section. And there's a book called The Jew, the Bible, and the Supernatural. I'm Jewish. I'm looking at the Bible now, and I'm into the supernatural. Perfect. I read the book, and it says it's an abomination for anyone to be involved in the occult or New Age. But for a Jew, it's worse. It listed famous Jewish people that dabbled in the New Age like I was doing and lost their life. And the one that really hit me was Brian Epstein. He was the Jewish manager of a group called the Beatles. They went to the Himalayas, Brian went with them, and at that time only one died. The Jew, Brian Epstein. We had everything I was looking for. Fame, money, everything he wanted. But he's dead. This really scared me. But at that time, I became convinced I had something evil inside of me, and I wanted it out. I reached my point, my absolute limit. Life was too hard. I gave up. Death looked better than life. And so one night, I didn't want to live anymore, but I prayed a 2-word prayer from a broken heart. Jesus, help. And when I woke up in the morning, I was shocked I was alive. But more than alive, there was something in my room. The whole atmosphere was alive with the love of God. I'd never experienced anything like this before. And I knew that that evil inside of me, it was gone. And I knew it had to do with that prayer, Jesus. And then I heard the audible voice of God for the first time in my life. And you know what he said to me? He said, I hate divorce. Return to your wife and daughter. And God restored my marriage, gave me back my daughter. And my wife and I have now celebrated our 51st wedding anniversary. I know that when I make a mistake, he not only will give me the power to overcome, but he'll wash it away. And there's nothing disturbing this intimacy, this love of God. When you know God, you have everything. When you just know about him, you have nothing. What do you have?
What do you have? You know, Sid says it so eloquently. We were created to have a relationship with our Creator. We were created to walk in the cool of the evening in a beautiful garden with him. And then we went our own way. And even in that, God has made a plan. He wants so much for you and for me to have an intimate relationship with him. He knows everything about us already. The number of hairs on our head, the desires of our heart, even the things we'll choose to do before we do them, even the things we've done deliberately, knowing they were wrong. And he makes a way. He sent Jesus, who took it all upon himself, who died under the burden, the heavy burden and load of the sin of all mankind, but very specifically for yours, for mine. So what are you going to do with that information? How's your life going? Do you have the kind of relationship that Sid was talking about? You can have, you know. God waits. He waits patiently. He waits lovingly. He waits hopefully for you and for me to hear the message of his love and to say, God, I'm done. I'm done doing this myself. I'm done striving. I'm done longing. I want you. I'm here. Now I get it. I want you to be my Savior. I want you to be the Lord of my life. That's what it's all about. And the moment you invite him, he's already with you, but he comes into you. And that's what Sid was talking about. When he woke up the next morning, the burden was gone, the weight of his sin, the inability to feel content, to feel satisfied, to feel that kind of joy, that deep joy that's not about happy, it's bigger than that. And if you'd like that, you can have it right now. Invite Jesus into the midst of your life. Acknowledge your need, surrender your will, and receive, just receive today all the joy, all the love, all the peace, all the hope that God promises to those who call upon his name. And if you'd like to pray with someone about a specific need in your life, there's a number you can call right now. It's there on your screen, 1-888-777-1999. Invite Christ into your life today. Gordon?
Well, we leave you this word from Romans chapter 1. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. Believe today. That's the key. Believe, and you'll have it. Believe that Jesus came. Believe that he died for you. Believe that he rose again from the grave. And you too can have the righteousness of God. God bless.